I have already explained several of my problems with the FNAF story. While it does certainly have its charm and is far from all negative, there are still so many weird points that drive me away from it. With having themes and stories being switched around, I eventually decided to just give up on watching any lore videos on FNAF, knowing that it would probably be changed last minute. Besides, due to the books now having ties in with the games and the books now feeling like they are getting published every other day, I just stopped caring. I did hear some of the tales here and there, especially with the ones involving the character, the Mimic, but yeah, that was pretty much all. Flash forward a couple of months and FNAF Ruin comes around. With it both came an excellent realization from Candy Cadet and a cameo of the Mimic. Something I wasn't stoked about, but it was a welcome surprise. Time passes and I don't really think much more of it. I hear Mimic tubes around, but I never really bothered looking at them. And that was until a friend of mine brought the lore to me. And let me say this. The entire lore dump that was given to me was almost always cut off from me verbally sending my applause and appreciation for the story of the Mimic. And now I not only think that the Mimic is a good character, but I think he's both one of the best stories thus far, and has rekindled my interest for the FNAF story. So, does that mean this video is me explaining and dumping the lore onto the rest of you? No, there are much better channels for that. Instead, I want to go by some of the best points in the story and explain why they are so great. But before we begin, just a heads up that a lot of these might be wrong or up to debate. I like the story with how it was explained to me, so I'm explaining in the way I like. Also, this video is without any knowledge from Help Wanted 2. Now with that out of the way, let me explain to you why the Mimic story works. There are two things that are going to be of major importance throughout this entire video, and those two things are the two themes that the Mimic story resides in. Those two themes being the misuse of learning AI, or just teaching AI the wrong things, pretty much the danger in AI in general, and the other far simpler one, which is sadly also weaker, being the theme of corruption of businesses and the negatives of them cutting corners. Now this in of itself is extremely cool to me. The original FNAF story didn't really have any themes. I guess you consider the story to have righting your wrongs as one, and also overcoming your heritage as another theme, but those are just stretches, as they aren't really fully played out or acted on. Unlike that previous story, however, this one makes sure to have its theme consistent. And remember those two themes, okay, as they play major importance. And also because we are now heading to the beginning, which I weirdly don't have much to talk about. Okay, I know this is the beginning, but while it is a really good story, that story isn't what I'm covering. However, I said I didn't have much to talk about, not that I didn't have anything to talk about. Because there is one part to which I wish to mention, and that is the start of the Mimic's murder spree. Long story short, our protagonist Edwin beats up a small robot out of rage, which the robot then mimics getting beaten and starts killing people who aren't in contact with it. And after several squads of people are killed, Fazbear Entertainment finally detains this animatronic. So we got a killer Mimic which is now detained. What's the problem there? Well, being the cheap, lazy company they are, Fazbear Entertainment copies the Mimic's code into a series of endos, giving them many cheap clones and opportunities for some big new projects. See that theme from earlier coming in? Anyways, with these cheap alternatives, and Fazbear Entertainment being the greedy bastards that they are, who hate to just do things the normal way, these Mimics not only learn the animatronic movements, as they were supposed to, but a bunch of the actions of humanity. And with all the negative stories in the books regarding Fazbear Entertainment, it is no surprise that things start spiraling out of control. Damn, who could have seen that coming? And even if these didn't exist, the constant bickering and competition between staffs and the business, and just the flat-out accidents of murders make it safe that these endos probably learned a few things. A few too many things. Yeah, are you catching on to that other theme more and more now, huh? Well, I hope you're ready, because this entire story is riddled full of escalation, which is just so freaking cool to me. Having the books being relevant in this way is something that's beautiful to me. And it actively makes sense that the Mimic would likely mostly copy the bad due to how the real world escalates anything they learn. And I'm not making that up, this is actual real world patterns of AI. AI in general usually is worse than actual behaviors because it believes that what is done or learned in the past is what it should do more of. And with Edwin showing the Mimic violence and giving the Mimic a grasp of grief and hatred, the Mimic has conditioned itself to behave and believe that violence is what it should be learning. And again, that is just so cool to me that this has real world parallels. But we have to continue with the story. So we got mimicking robots which are copying the worst of humanity, but at least they aren't like majorly widespread. It's not like they are endangering everyday citizens, right? Okay, so yeah, if it wasn't obvious, these are genuine threats to humanity now. And what is crazy is that this works with the fundamental part of the game. Animatronics don't just gain their personality by suits, but instead by its CPUs that do the part. And the fact that they are all violent either means that Fazbear doesn't even have a single location without an incident, or the far more terrifying option that the Mimic has some sort of hive mind. And it's likely a little of both. Luckily, in one of the few times where Fazbear Entertainment actually has his brains do something other than playing tic-tac-toe, does something smart. They shut down the Mimic line. And not only that, but they actually just copy the code visually rather than just copy and pasting the entire program into the software, making the animatronics not as murder happy. However, do not think they aren't corrupt, because in true Fazbear Entertainment fashion, they use some of the Mimic program to make a sort of network, which has obviously the Mimic program embedded into it. The network was created to essentially make ideas and run things, instead of the company just doing it themselves, because you know what, that would be what logical people would do. But it's not only the company that's corrupted and lazy, the workers are so as well. Which is how we get the one endo that appears in your mind the first thing when you think of the Mimic. And with this, the escalation goes through the goddamn roof. Why? Well, beside all the murderous intent in mind that it has learned beforehand, but has now grown a purpose to destroy and rip apart endos. Gee, I wonder why that's a bad thing. But what truly makes the escalation go through the roof is how with both of these things combined, the Mimic has evolved from what it's previously learned, and instead of murdering passively now, it actively searched for the act of murder. While the Mimic did murder people, at least it was a character with a transparent morality, where they are a murderer, but they aren't doing it purposefully. They are doing it passively because that's all they know. But now the Mimic is this freakish bipedal form of welded scrap that actively enjoys murder and causing as much pain as it can. While you could argue that violence is still the only thing it knows, it is now actively searching for the act of violence. And while it's still doing it out of all it knows, it still has gross and horrible intentions. And to show this, the Mimic not only rips the employees apart, but sometimes even its fellow Mimics. Because again, because it has taken self-education classes to make it teach itself to copy the most heinous parts of humanity, which includes enjoying the thrill of killing, murder, and violence. Which with how AI works, it will register that as hating its own kind. And this is just so cool to me. As someone who is fascinated with AI and its properties, this is like the banana splits if it was actually good. So yeah, this story is super damn cool to me, because it makes logical sense and it focuses on a real cool heightening of threat. But while this is cool, there are many, ill factors with how the FNAF is structured. Sure, this is cool, but it's tainted by the complications of the other factors of FNAF. And you would be dead wrong for thinking that, because Steel will decide to not only make this amazing story happen, but actually the most confusing area's actual work. They have fixed so many problems I originally had with the FNAF story and how it was structured, and made those some of my favorite parts. Now that is talent. So obviously I'm enjoying talking about this, so let's not waste any time. So as I have said, many of these complicated plots and imagery get fixed with the Mimic storyline. So what should I talk about first? Well, why don't I talk about someone that I had to painfully leave absent for a good majority of the last section. And that is our favorite bunny glitch, Malhair. Yes, I'm calling it Malhair, not Springtrap, because I'm different. The original origins of Springtrap started as Afton's spirit, or at least part of his spirit, being put into a code, and I had mixed feelings about this if I'm being honest. It was a good concept, but this new one, where Glitchtrap is actually part of Mimic, works so much better for me. This new storyline being here just creates so many fun little mysteries that can be there just for flavor, and the actual important lore is still really cool in of itself. And all of this has simply resulted from Springtrap being a part of the Mimic program, which might seem like a small change, but it's a change that I love nonetheless. So Malheur in this new adaptation is now copying both all the video game adaptation of Afton and likely some real world inspiration. I wholeheartedly love this on so many levels, as every small thing just clicks in the right way for me. The rabbit suit doesn't really look like a Springlock suit. While it can be speculated that it's actually a remade sprite given the knowledge that I was already had, kind of like AI generated art. And again, as someone who is fascinated with AI's capabilities, this is just cool to me. The certain places where Glitchtrap is glitchy in some areas and others is not, can be jotted up to how Spring Bonnie was going to be a part of the game. However, the Mimic is using differing animations, hence why it looks so glitchy and unrendered. This and everything more makes so much sense to me, and it's a beautiful sight to see. And when looking at how weirdly handled Glitchtrap was before, this makes just way too much sense for me. While Glitchtrap has still had a major glow up, the end goal for his character is still simply to brainwash others. But it is handled so much better in here. We get more information allowing us to make correct assumptions about the characters and their lore and specifics. What Glitchtrap has and hasn't done has been very loosely connected. However, we see none of that here. We don't have to go to far stretches to believe Gregory ended up hacking in some areas. Instead, we know almost surely that he's under the control of Glitchtrap with just actual logic and factual evidence. I could go on and on about this, but we have to move on to yet another big change for the better. Who is getting changed? Well, it's the blob, or I guess Tango, which we refer to as now. So you know how the Mimic was basically sent to discard and rip apart endos and then later to do that with people? Well, it turns out all of the different endos and people ended up giving creation to the blob. I love this change. The blob has always felt so odd to me, like it was an extra lore there for no reason, with nothing accompanying it. Sure, I like the agony as a concept, but it still felt way too covered here. But this, it fully works with the AI theme going on. While some of the animatronic parts could likely be from AR, a good portion of the props are hinted to be the ones with real-world tragedy behind them. We can even guess which ones are the AR versions and which ones are authentic, given the red eyes. The ones with the red pupils are the AR versions, while the ones which are soulless are the real deal. And with all of the other agony fueled into it by dead people, this thing is essentially its own hive mind of destruction, filled of hate from the real missing children and a heavy amount of fear and agony from the countless victims that the Mimic has murdered. And the clear distinction is that the souls of these dead children are free. This is the agony, not the souls, which is such a good way of setting up a new chapter of FNAF's story. And with this, it's anger to any animatronic or organic being. And with all this negative emotion, this thing must hate the Mimic, so anything even loosely connected to it is essentially kill on sight. Even with the actual name Tango, which is a name I still fucking hate, does have some good qualities behind it. So we have this giant hulk of exaggeration and escalation with so many wrongs and full of a need of revenge. And who is the character we see gets the most hate from this thing? And guess what? Burntrap is fixed even more so than some of the other things I have mentioned. And it is all because of one very controversial theory. Is Burntrap... Yes, 100% yes. Many people hate this. But for me and many others, this makes Burntrap so much better. So how do we know that these two are officially connected? Well, besides a lot of other evidence, there is one specific Fazbear Fright story. So in one of the Tales of the Pizzaplex books, we get a story of a group of teenagers who venture down to a place behind Roxy Wasteray, which just so happens to be blocked off. God, I wonder where this could be going. Anyways, painfully obvious sarcasm behind. Long story short, they find the Mimic. Shocker, I know. But one key factor is a weird turn of events that happens. After the Mimic rearranges some of the teens, like how I do with my Lego minifigures, one special teen crawls inside of a spring-like bunny suit. Then the Mimic uses its new Ender-like powers, allowing it to go into any crevice it wishes to crawl inside her skin and crush her bones. Not only is this truly terrifying and horrifying and renders the Mimic one of the worst chiropractors to ever exist, but I'm guessing you already have connected the dots. Human with crushed bone being replaced by giant metal robot being in a spring-locked bunny suit. Who could this be referring to? Golly gee, I wonder that. Yeah, this is obviously Burntrap, no doubt about it. And what I love is how this works. They made an entire story as an excuse for Burntrap's existence. They literally could have done the much easier thing and have decided that the ending was non-canon and that Burntrap didn't exist. Therefore, nothing would be important. But this is a legitimate reason to how Burntrap exists, and it's a plausible conclusion. And as I have said, there are even more connections between these two characters. Heck, the entire jumble of mimic stories go with how it changed. There are reasons the version we see in game is different. There are so many points and factual evidence that make this plausible and not just a what-if scenario. And while I didn't cover all of these, because again, I'm not a timeline YouTuber, I still have big things to say about this, and a huge round of applause to Steelwool Studios. We get to see the escalation of the mimic, learning from the worst of humanity, getting filled with agony, getting worse due to the company and employees failing to do their job correctly, and it all goes down into a beautiful rabbit hole where when I first heard about all of this, my only anticipation was when the next big escalation was going to occur. When will this thing reach its limit? And with all of this, the Mimic again has grown to be a self-taught, self-trained, self-conditioned killer. It is no longer a machine that just does things passively with conditional circumstances. This thing has goals, and that is murder. And not just murder, we can see how it actively likes toying with its prey, making characters suffer grim and sin-recalling pain before their demises. We can see how the Mimic calls back to one line, "I'm Gregory," multiple times just to terrify Cassie and piss her off. It even slows down just so it can take more time, because it enjoys the thrill of the chase and causing as much agony and fear as possible. Even the clear Roxy at the end of the credits could be the Mimic screwing with her. This thing is passive. It had to be sealed down by concrete and had to be defended by AIs. After the years of being sealed and finally tricking Cassie, it doesn't even try to escape. Escaping is the dessert. Killing Cassie is the filet mignon of the experience. And when this psycho machine killer finally gets out, and when it spreads its mimic ways across the area, actively searching to kill with a second one fueled by hatred, and hatred alone almost makes no one safe. The Mimic is not only a greatly written character with great themes, great escalation, and a great story, it is also a terrifying menace. This story definitely isn't perfect, but this is the best FNAF story we have gotten, period, with the most terrifying antagonist that we might ever have. The storyline isn't perfect, but this story is still so damn nice. I had to scrap out so much worthwhile coverage on this topic. Seals will somehow manage to fix so many problems I had with the earlier issues of the FNAF story, and those that didn't really need to get fixed were immensely improved. Really, the only negative thing I had to say that isn't really nitpicky is how I didn't get to see this all in real time. And even then, that isn't even truly Steelwool's fault, all things considered. This escalation with themes, a coherent story, everything is so beautifully done. And it's a story built to last, where I don't have to be worried about how it's gonna get retconned later. My second video may have set the point of what FNAF's most satisfying moment was, but the moment we defeat the Mimic is the moment where that moment gets surpassed greatly.